In a quiet village, surrounded by dust roads and the scent of mango trees, lived an old man named Mr. Charles. He was in his early 60s, respected by many, quiet in nature, and known for keeping to himself. His wife, Mrs. Faith, was the opposite, sharp-tongued, loud and proud. People said her voice could cut through the wind like a blade. They had 3 children: Paul, the first son, in his 30s, Frank, the second son, in his early 20s, and Mandy, the last-born, just 18. On the surface, they looked like a loving family. But within the walls of their compound, pain grew like weeds. Paul had once left the village with dreams in his pocket and nothing more. He went to the city to work at a construction site. But after many years away, he returned quietly, without money, without fanfare, with only his wife and 2 children by his side. No car, no gifts, no sign of wealth. That was the beginning of his humiliation. His younger brother Frank had made small money through electronic sales and suddenly became the shining star of the family. He dressed well, spoke with pride, and walked like the village belonged to him. Every week he brought gifts for their mother, Ankara wrappers, perfumes, tins of milk, and each time he came home, Mrs. Faith would shout with joy, "My son, my son," she would say loudly, clapping her hands. "See what God has done for me." But when Paul entered the compound, carrying his child in one hand and a small bag in the other, nobody clapped. His mother only looked at him from the corner of her eye. "So you came back with nothing?" she asked. Paul had no words. He simply nodded and walked into his father's old room, where they had prepared a small corner for him and his family. Since then, his life in that house had been bitter. Frank no longer greeted him with respect. Mandy would roll her eyes whenever he spoke. Mrs. Faith would shout at his children if they ran near Frank's side of the house, "Keep those poor children away from Frank's room. I don't want their bad luck near my son." Paul's wife wept in silence. She would cook, clean and smile, but still be treated like a stranger. No one cared, except Mr. Charles. The old man watched everything. He saw how his first son was, being crushed daily under the feet of his own family. He saw how his grandchildren were being treated like outsiders in their own grandfather's house. And each time he sat under the mango tree with Paul, he would offer him cola nut and say softly, "Let them do as they please. Time will speak." But what no one in that house knew, what not even Mr. Charles knew, was that Paul was not poor. He was a billionaire. He had made his wealth in silence. After years of working in the city, he met an old Italian investor who helped him set up his own construction firm. His company grew, contracts came, he built estates, roads, even shopping malls. He had a mansion in the city, cars in his name, a private account filled with money, but when it was time to return to the village, he wore his old clothes and entered a local bus. He wanted to test them. He wanted to see how they would treat a man who had nothing, or at least appeared to have nothing. That night, Paul sat outside under the mango tree, his child asleep on his lap. He looked at the sky, his eyes calm. "They think I'm a failure," he whispered. "Let them think it, because when the time comes and the truth is revealed, their shame will be louder than their insults." The morning sun rose gently over the village roofs, casting light on the small compound where Mr. Charles and his family lived. The air smelled of firewood and pap. Children from nearby houses were already outside, chasing each other and laughing. But in Mr. Charles's house, the laughter stopped at one door, Paul's door. Inside his small room, Paul folded his child's clothes carefully into a basket. His wife was sweeping the corner silently, her eyes tired, her spirit heavy. Their 2 children sat on the mat watching her. There was no television, no toys, no space, only peace. And even that was thin. Suddenly, a loud voice tore through the silence. "Mandy, where's the water I asked for?" Mrs. Faith shouted from the back of the house. "I'm coming, Mummy," Mandy replied sweetly, her slippers slapping against the floor as she hurried. The entire house moved when Mrs. Faith spoke, except Paul's side. His wife paused for a second, then continued sweeping. "She didn't even greet me this morning," she said under her breath. Paul touched her gently. "Let it go, Tina. A greeting from the heart is more important than noise from the lips." She nodded and kept quiet, but her eyes burned with unspoken pain. Just then, Paul stepped outside. He walked across the compound to fetch water for his children to bathe. His younger brother Frank had parked his new car beside the house the night before. A sleek black car, polished like glass. Paul walked past it slowly, but Frank, standing beside the car, didn't move. He didn't even say good morning. Paul didn't expect one. As Paul lifted the water bucket, he heard his mother's voice again. "Frank, don't allow those children play near your car. If they scratch it, that's the end." Paul turned. His mother stood in the corridor, her arms folded, her face sharp. "They are just children," Paul said calmly. "They are children of poverty," she replied coldly. "Children that can't stay where they belong." Frank chuckled. Mandy joined in from the window. Paul said nothing. He took the water and went back inside. Later that morning, as everyone sat at the dining table, Paul and his family remained in their room. They were never invited to breakfast. His wife boiled yam in a small kerosene stove at the back of the house. The children sat quietly, waiting. Mr. Charles watched from his seat. He saw everything. How his wife smiled only at Frank. How Mandy served food like a princess. How Paul was treated like a beggar. It broke his heart. "Paul," he called softly, standing up, "come and sit with me under the tree." Paul came. They sat in silence at first. Then Mr. Charles spoke. "You are my first son. You came from my youth, from the years when I had nothing but strength and love, and yet they treat you like dust." Paul smiled faintly. "Baba, it's fine." "No, it's not fine," Mr. Charles said. "But I've lived long enough to know. Life always turns. Those who fly today may fall tomorrow." Paul nodded. "And those who walk may someday soar." The old man looked at his son as if searching for something. "Paul, is there something you're not telling me?" Paul met his father's eyes. He wanted to speak. He wanted to say everything, that he had cars, houses, riches, but he swallowed it. "Not yet, Papa," he whispered, "but soon." And Mr. Charles, even without understanding, placed his hand on Paul's back and said, "May your silence grow like a seed, and when it blooms, may the fruits humble the proud." That evening, as the family sat outside enjoying Frank's music from the car, Paul remained inside with his wife and children. No sound, no attention, but in his heart a plan had already begun, a plan to reveal the truth, not with noise, but with time. 3 days passed, 3 long days of silence, pride, and quiet pain. Paul went about his daily routine like a man with no destination. Each morning he fetched water. He cleaned the yard. He even helped his mother with small tasks. But she never thanked him. His wife, Tina, kept herself busy with washing, cooking, and caring for the children. She avoided trouble, but the pain showed in her eyes. Frank, on the other hand, grew louder. He had just bought a new phone, and every corner of the compound heard his calls. He blasted music from his car speakers. Every evening, he gathered boys from the village, showing them photos, talking big, laughing carelessly. Mandy spent most of her time on her phone, too. She walked past Paul like he was a stranger, and Mrs. Faith, her mouth never rested. "You see why I always tell people it's not about firstborn," she said loudly one afternoon as she peeled yam in front of the house. "If you carry a goat and feed it from childhood, will it still become a lion?" "No," Frank laughed. "Some people are just born to suffer, Mummy." Paul stood at the back of the house, quietly scrubbing his child's clothes. He heard every word. His hand slowed. His eyes burned. But still, he said nothing. Mr. Charles had gone to the village square earlier that day. He returned with palm oil and a small bag of dry fish. As he stepped into the compound, he noticed something. Frank and Mandy were eating fried rice under the tree. Paul's children stood nearby, watching, hungry. Mrs. Faith came out, saw them, and screamed, "Go inside! Haven't I told you people not to hang around when your uncle is eating?" The little ones ran off. Mr. Charles dropped his bag and walked slowly to where Frank sat. "You didn't offer them food?" Frank shrugged. "It's not enough, Papa. Let their father cook for them." Charles turned and walked away. His heart cracked. That evening a visitor came, a tall man in suit, well-dressed, clean. He had a gold wristwatch and calm eyes. He entered the compound, looked around, and walked straight to Paul's side of the house. "Good evening," he greeted. Paul stepped out. Tina looked confused. "Good evening, sir." The man smiled. "Mr. Paul Johnson, my boss, sent me. He asked me to confirm your final decision on the construction site in Abuja. Should we release the funds or wait till next month?" Everyone in the compound froze. Frank turned. Mandy dropped her phone. Mrs. Faith stepped closer, eyes wide. "Funds, construction site." Paul stepped forward slowly. "Tell your boss I said we'll begin next month. I'll come to the office myself on Monday." "Yes, sir." The man bowed. "He also said the new Lexus has arrived. Should he send it here?" Paul smiled gently. "No, I'll pick it up myself." The man nodded and left. The compound was silent. No one spoke. Paul turned and entered his room, closing the door gently behind him. Mrs. Faith blinked several times. "Frank, did you know about this?" Frank shook his head. "No." She turned to Mandy. "Did you?" Mandy looked lost. I thought he was broke." Inside his room, Paul sat beside Tina, who stared at him with trembling lips. "You never told me," she whispered. Paul smiled. "I wanted to know if they loved me, not for what I have, but for who I am." Tears gathered in her eyes. Outside, Mr. Charles smiled under the mango tree. He whispered to himself, "Let the rain fall. The dry ground is ready." The next morning was quiet, too quiet. For the first time in a long time, Mrs. Faith didn't shout. She moved around the house in silence, glancing often at Paul's door, as if trying to understand something her heart could not accept. Frank, who had always walked with his chest out, now walked slowly. His voice was lower. His music was off. Mandy barely came out of her room, but Paul was the same. He fetched water, he cleaned the compound, he swept under the mango tree. Then he sat with his children and told them stories. It was not pride. He wasn't showing off. He simply remained the same man they had all looked down on, except now their eyes were open. Mrs. Faith couldn't stop thinking. The man who had come the day before was clearly rich. Clean suit, big car, and he called Paul Sir. Her chest grew heavy. She remembered how many times she had insulted him, how she had denied his children food, how she had shut her door when his wife came to greet her. Tears stung her eyes. She went to the kitchen and cooked rice and stew with her own hands. For the first time in years, she placed it in a tray and walked slowly toward Paul's room. She knocked. Tina opened the door, surprised. Mrs. Faith didn't speak at first. She simply looked at her daughter-in-law with shaky hands and whispered, "Please give this to Paul and the children." Tina hesitated, then nodded slowly. When Paul saw the tray, he didn't speak. He looked at Tina. "Who brought it?" "Your mother," she replied quietly. Paul took a deep breath and turned away. That same evening, Frank walked to his father. "Papa," he said, "can I talk to you?" Mr. Charles didn't reply immediately. He was chewing cola nut under the mango tree. Frank sat beside him, awkward. "Papa, I didn't know Paul was doing well." Charles looked at him. "So if you had known, you would have respected him." Frank lowered his head. "No, Papa, I don't know." "That's the problem," Mr. Charles said. "You all wait for someone to rise before you show them kindness. But true love sees beyond clothes and status." Frank sighed. You worshipped. Money, Charles continued. Even when the one with real wealth was sitting quietly among you, you looked at his sandals and judged his soul. Frank couldn't look up. Later that night, Mandy knocked softly on Paul's door. He opened it. She stood there holding a small note in her hand. I'm sorry, she whispered, handing it to him. Paul, read it. It simply said, I was blind. Please forgive me. He looked at her. You're still my sister, he said gently. I never stopped loving you. Tears ran down Mandy's face. Inside the house, Mrs. Faith knelt beside her bed praying. For the first time in years, with a humble heart, God, forgive me, she whispered. I failed my son. She remembered how Paul used to bring her gifts as a child, how he would wait for her at the gate after school, how he would cry when she was sick, and she had treated him like dirt, because she thought he was poor. Outside, Paul sat under the mango tree again, looking at the sky. His wife sat beside him, her head on his shoulder. They are changing, she said. Paul nodded. Because truth changes everything. Not money, not revenge, just truth. And he had revealed it without lifting a finger. The following morning, the sun rose slowly, and for the first time in weeks, peace wrapped itself around the compound like a gentle cloth. The air smelled of early rain, and birds chirped from the trees. But in Mr. Charles's house, hearts were restless. Mrs. Faith had barely slept. Her thoughts were heavy. She wanted to make things right, but her pride stood in the way like a wall, too high to climb. Each time she saw Paul, her heart twisted with guilt. She remembered his silence, how he never raised his voice no matter how badly they treated him. Paul, on the other hand, woke early. He bathed the children and helped Tina sweep the compound. He greeted everyone calmly, like nothing had changed. But everyone now walked on eggshells around him. Frank stayed inside more often. Mandy stopped shouting. Even Mrs. Faith began to clean the corridor herself, something she hadn't done in years. Then, around mid-morning, a black SUV drove into the compound. It didn't belong to anyone they knew. The car stopped gently, the engine humming like a quiet lion. The door opened, and a tall woman stepped out. She wore a long, cream-colored gown, her shoes sharp and neat. She had the grace of someone used to luxury, but her smile was warm. Paul stepped forward. "Ma'am," he greeted with a small bow. The woman smiled. "Good morning, Mr. Paul. I hope I'm not too early." "Not at all. Please come in." Mrs. Faith watched from behind the curtain, confused. Frank peeped through the window. Mandy stood frozen at the kitchen door. Paul led the woman to the mango tree and brought out a chair for her. Tina brought water and juice in a tray. "Thank you, dear," the woman said kindly. Then she turned to Paul. "Your Abuja project is ready. The governor signed the final papers yesterday. I just needed you to take a look before we begin mobilization." Paul nodded, took the folder, and flipped through the pages with ease. His eyes scanned the figures, the legal terms, and the stamps like a man used to such things. Behind the curtain, Mrs. Faith gasped softly. Her hands trembled. "Paul? Reading legal documents with a state official?" Frank's knees weakened. He sat on the bed and covered his face. After the visitor left, Paul turned and saw his mother standing near the doorway. "Paul," she called gently. He walked over to her. "My son," she said again, her voice shaking. "I have no excuse, only shame." Paul said nothing. "I judged you too quickly. I mocked you. I hurt your children, but you still respected me. You never shouted, never reminded me who you were. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I beg for it anyway." Paul looked at her, then he smiled sadly. "Mama, you are still my mother. Your words hurt, but your regret means more. I forgive you." She fell into his arms, weeping like a child. Frank came out too. He knelt down. "Brother Paul, forgive me." Paul helped him up. "I don't keep pain in my heart. You're still my brother." Even Mandy hugged him that day. Later that night, Mr. Charles sat alone under the mango tree, smiling to himself. His first son, the one they all thought was a disgrace, had taught them all a lesson, not with insults, but with dignity. "Now they see you," he whispered, looking up at the stars. "Now they know the gold they had buried in dust." The days that followed were slow and quiet. It was as if the whole house had taken a deep breath after a long storm. Peace moved gently through the compound. Voices grew softer. Steps became lighter. And for the first time in years, the walls of that house held respect. Paul remained the same. He still woke early, still fetched water, still sat with his children under the mango tree. But now, every eye followed him with wonder. Not fear, not pity, but quiet respect. His mother, Mrs. Faith, no longer shouted at anyone. She brought food to his room every evening. She cleaned the yard herself. Each time she looked at Paul, her heart broke and healed at the same time. Frank became quiet. He stopped bringing his boys to the house. He sat alone, often thinking, sometimes walking to Paul to ask questions about business. Paul answered with patience. He held no pride. Mandy began to help Tina in the kitchen. The two women who once walked past each other like strangers were now laughing over firewood. One afternoon, Mr. Charles called for a family meeting under the mango tree. Everyone came. Paul sat beside Tina. His children played close by. Frank sat straight, quiet. Mandy wore a long gown and kept her phone away. Mrs. Faith folded her hands, her face calm and thoughtful. Mr. Charles cleared his throat. "I called this meeting not to correct you, but to bless you," he began slowly. "This house has changed. My heart is glad, but I want us to remember something." He looked at each of them one by one. "We failed Paul," he said clearly. "We treated him like a beggar. Even I, his father, failed to ask the questions I should have asked. But Paul, you carried yourself with quiet strength, and today you've made us proud, not because of money, but because of your heart." Paul bowed his head. "I want this family to grow from now on," Charles continued. "No more mockery, no more favoritism. Rich or poor, we are one blood. If Paul had not been strong, we would still be blind." Then he stood and placed his hands on Paul's head. "I bless you, my son, not for the riches you have, but for the patience you showed when we called you poor." Tears gathered in Mrs. Faith's eyes again. She stood up slowly and joined them. "I have one more thing to say," she whispered. "Paul, I know I don't deserve it, but I want to be part of your life again, your children's lives, your wife's life. Please don't shut me out." Paul looked at her gently. "Mama, the door you closed by pride has now opened by your humility. Come in. We never shut you out." Tina stood and hugged her. The children danced around the tree. Even Frank smiled for the first time in days. That evening, as the sun went down and shadows danced across the compound, the family sat together under the mango tree, sharing food, laughter, and stories. No one mentioned money, no one needed to. The truth had already done its work. It had humbled the proud, healed the wounded, and united the broken. Paul had tested them. And now love had passed the test. 2 weeks passed, then a month. Life in Mr. Charles's compound became peaceful again, not because everything was perfect, but because hearts had been changed. The old ways of pride and judgment had melted, and in their place stood something stronger: respect, humility, and quiet love. Paul no longer needed to pretend, but still he lived simply. He didn't rush to build a mansion in the village or show off cars. He took his time. One morning, a truck arrived from the city. It brought new mattresses, kitchen tools, school bags for the children, and groceries in large cartons. Frank helped unload them without waiting to be told. Mandy swept the floor where the bags would stay. Tina stood beside her husband, her heart full. Mrs. Faith watched from the veranda, shaking her head slowly. "So this is the same Paul we nearly drove away," she whispered to herself. God truly hides treasure in places we ignore. That night, Paul sat quietly outside, his father. Beside him, Mr. Charles turned to him. "You've done what even I couldn't do," Paul smiled. "I didn't plan it to hurt anyone, Papa. I only wanted to see clearly." "And now that you've seen?" Mr. Charles asked. Paul looked up at the sky. Stars blinked gently above. "I've forgiven," he said, "but I've also learned." Mr. Charles nodded slowly. "Life is like a river. Sometimes it bends through dry land to teach us thirst, but in the end, it always flows home." Inside the house, Frank was writing notes. Paul had promised to help him start a better business, but only after he learned planning and patience. Frank was willing now. The arrogance had dropped. He asked questions. He listened. Mandy had enrolled in a computer training center. Paul paid her fees without saying a word about the past. To him, what mattered was tomorrow, not yesterday. Mrs. Faith became softer. She now told anyone who came to visit, "My first son is a blessing. I nearly lost him, but God opened my eyes." Tina, once shy and withdrawn, was now celebrated in the compound. Her cooking was praised, her kindness was noticed. She walked with confidence, and her children ran around freely, no longer stopped at any door. One Sunday afternoon, the whole family dressed up and went to church together. People stared. The same Paul they had called the broke son now walked with quiet strength beside his father. He gave his offering in silence. He didn't need a loud prayer. At the end of the service, the pastor said, "Sometimes the person you reject is the one God sent to bless you." Mrs. Faith wept quietly. She knew the words were true. Back at home, that evening, Paul sat again under the mango tree. His wife brought him a glass of cold water. His children laughed nearby. His father sat beside him, quiet and proud. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt whole, not because of riches, but because love had been restored. Paul didn't need to announce his wealth. His dignity had spoken louder than gold, and those who once mocked him now honored him, not just because he had money, but because they finally saw the man they never saw before.